My name is Olivia Kessler, and I never thought something so happy could turn into something so painful. After years of saving, working extra hours, and struggling to stay stable, I finally bought my first house in Austin, Texas. When I signed the papers, I felt like I had finally won my freedom. It wasn't just a house to me. It was proof that I could build my own life. On the day I moved in, my parents came to see it. My mom smiled as she walked through the living room, touching the walls like she was proud of me. My dad nodded quietly, saying it was a good place. Even my brother Caleb was there. He hugged me and said he was happy for me, like he truly supported my success. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my family was actually proud of me. That evening, I stood alone in my new kitchen and felt peace. No arguments, no pressure, just silence and my own space. I remember thinking that everything I went through was worth it. I believed my life was finally starting. But I was wrong. A few weeks later, everything changed in a way I never expected. Police arrived at my house early in the morning. They said there was a legal case against me involving fraud and false documents connected to the house. I didn't understand what they were talking about. Before I could even process it, I was being placed in handcuffs. My neighbors came out of their homes and watched. Some were whispering, others were recording. I turned and saw my parents standing on the porch. They weren't stopping it. They weren't defending me. They were just watching. And Caleb was there too, silent, with an expression I couldn't read. In that moment, I realized something terrible was beginning. The house I thought would give me freedom had become the center of my downfall. After I settled into the house, I started noticing small things that didn't feel right. At first, I tried to ignore them because I didn't want to ruin my own peace. But then I realized it was happening too often to be a coincidence. Important papers I kept in my home office were not exactly where I left them. Not missing completely, just slightly moved, like someone had looked through them and tried to put them back the same way. A few pieces of mail also disappeared for a day or two before showing up again opened. Caleb started visiting more often than usual. He would ask casual questions, but they always circled back to my house. How much I paid, what bank I used, what documents I signed, and even who helped me with the closing process. At first, I answered normally, thinking he was just curious. But later it started to feel like an interrogation disguised as conversation. When I mentioned it to my parents, they didn't take it seriously. My mom told me I was being paranoid and should stop creating problems where there weren't any. My dad said Caleb was just being a protective brother. They both acted like I was the one overthinking everything. But one evening changed how I saw everything. I came back home later than usual and parked a little down the street. From there, I saw Caleb standing outside my house, talking to someone I didn't recognize. The person handed him a small envelope. Caleb checked around before taking it, then quickly put it inside his jacket. The moment felt wrong, like something secret was being exchanged. When I walked closer, both of them separated like nothing happened. Caleb acted normal when he saw me, like he had just been waiting outside. But I couldn't forget what I saw. That night, I started writing everything down. Times, dates, conversations, anything unusual. I even saved copies of every document related to the house and stored them in different places. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for, but I had a strange feeling that I needed proof of everything. I just didn't realize yet that I was already part of something much bigger than I could understand. That morning started like any other, but it ended my sense of normal life. I was making coffee when I heard a sharp knock at the door. A man stood there holding a thick envelope and asked me to confirm my name. Before I could even ask a question, he handed it over and left. Inside were court papers. My hand started shaking as I read through the pages. Caleb had officially filed a lawsuit against me. He was claiming that I used fake income documents to qualify for the house loan. According to him, I had lied to the bank and manipulated the entire approval process. It didn't make sense. Every document I submitted had gone through legal checks. My credit history, my income, everything was real and verified. I kept reading the same lines over and over, trying to find where this was coming from, but nothing added up. I called my parents immediately. Instead of shock or anger, their reaction felt strangely calm. My mom told me I should just cooperate and not make things worse. My dad said it was probably just a misunderstanding and that I should handle it quietly within the family. But it didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt like I was being pushed into something without being given a chance to defend myself. I tried to contact a lawyer the same day. I explained everything carefully, hoping someone would see how wrong this was. But when I mentioned Caleb's name, I noticed the lawyer pause for a second, like he already knew something about the situation. He told me he would need time to review everything before taking the case. That same afternoon, I learned Caleb had already hired legal representation and submitted documents before I even knew a case existed. It felt like he had prepared everything in advance, like he had been waiting for the right moment. For the first time, a cold thought entered my mind. This wasn't a sudden fight between siblings. This wasn't confusion or family disagreement. It felt planned, organized, and carefully built. And I was already standing in the middle of it without knowing how deep it went. That morning started with loud knocking that didn't feel normal. I opened the door still half-dressed, thinking it might be another delivery or some mistake. Instead, I saw police officers standing outside my home. Their expressions were serious, not confused or unsure. They asked if I was Olivia Kessler. Before I could even fully respond, they told me I was being taken in for fraud and document forgery related to my house purchase. My mind went blank for a second. I kept saying there had to be some mistake, that everything was legal and processed through proper channels. But they didn't listen in the way I needed them to. They asked me to step outside. My hands were shaking as I walked down my front steps. The air felt heavier than usual, like even my own house was pushing me out. One officer turned me around and placed handcuffs on my wrists. The cold metal hit harder than I expected. I looked up and saw my neighbors standing across the street. Some had come out in robes, others were still holding coffee cups. Nobody spoke. They just watched. Then I saw my parents on the porch. My mother had her hand over her mouth, but she didn't move. My father stood beside her, stiff and silent, like he was trying not to react at all. Neither of them came forward. Neither of them said my name out loud. And then I saw Caleb. He was standing slightly behind them, watching everything unfold. What hurt most was not anger on his face, not even satisfaction. It was calmness. Like he expected it. Like he had already seen this moment before it happened. As I was guided toward the police car, I kept looking back, waiting for someone, anyone, to say this was wrong. But the silence stayed the same. In that moment, something inside me shifted. It didn't feel like I was being arrested just for a case. It felt like everything I built, everything I believed about my family, was being taken apart in front of me. And I finally understood, this wasn't just about a lawsuit anymore. It was the end of my name in their eyes. The jail cell felt smaller at night. I couldn't sleep, so I kept replaying everything in my mind again and again, trying to find where I went wrong. It wasn't just fear. It was confusion. Nothing about the case felt natural, like it had grown on its own. It felt built. When my lawyer came to meet me, he brought a thick file. Inside were all the documents Caleb had submitted against me. Bank statements, income reports, loan files. I studied every page closely, expecting to find something I had missed. But the more I looked, the stranger it felt. Some signatures looked too clean, almost copied in a way that removed human mistakes. Dates didn't line up properly. Even the formatting looked too perfect, like everything had been arranged to look convincing rather than real. I asked my lawyer one simple question: where did all of this actually come from? He didn't answer immediately. That pause made me feel worse than the documents themselves. Then I remembered something important. My house had a full security system when I moved in. Cameras inside and outside, connected to a cloud system. If anything had happened, it should have been recorded. I told my lawyer to request full access to the security logs, especially the days when I wasn't home or when Caleb visited. I felt a small hope that maybe something would explain the missing pieces. The next day, he returned with a strange expression. He said there was a problem. Some parts of the footage were missing. Not the entire system, just specific days and time blocks that matched key moments in the case timeline. My stomach dropped when I heard that. I asked if it could be a technical error. He shook his head and said the system didn't show signs of failure. It looked like selective removal or interference. That was the first time I realized something chilling. Someone hadn't just accused me. They had gone inside my system, my home records, and carefully removed what they didn't want to exist. And now I wasn't just defending myself in court. I was trying to figure out who had been inside my life without me ever noticing. My lawyer told me I couldn't rely only on court procedures anymore. He said the case had too many gaps and I needed someone who could look beyond official records. That's when he introduced me to a private investigator named Derek Mallory. Derek showed up the next day. He wasn't dramatic or overly emotional. He just listened carefully as I explained everything from the beginning. He took notes without interrupting and asked very specific questions about dates, signatures, and anyone who had access to my home systems. For the first time, someone didn't treat me like I was confused or overreacting. A few days later, he started sending updates. He had already found problems in Caleb's financial claims. The numbers didn't match official bank records. Some income sources he listed didn't exist at all, and certain approvals seemed to come from channels that didn't connect properly. Derek didn't stop there. He traced one of the documents back to a processing contact used during the loan verification stage. That contact led to a small, unknown third-party service that handled paperwork edits and corrections. It wasn't supposed to be involved in my file at all. When I asked him what it meant, he stayed quiet for a moment before answering. He said this didn't look like a simple family dispute or a misunderstanding between siblings. Then he said something I still remember clearly. "This isn't a brother trying to win a case, this is someone building a frame-up." Those words hit me harder than anything I had heard since my arrest. Because deep down, I already felt it, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a different way. For the first time since everything started, I didn't feel like I was losing my mind. I felt like someone else could finally see what I was seeing. Not emotions. Not confusion. Just a pattern that didn't belong. And that was the first moment I truly believed this case wasn't as simple as it looked from the outside. Derek kept digging deeper, talking to people from my family's past that I had never even met before. Old accountants, a former business partner of my father, and even someone who once worked briefly with Caleb years ago. At first, I didn't understand why any of that mattered to my case. Then he called me with something that changed everything. He had found records showing my parents had signed financial guarantees for Caleb's old business venture. It was something I had never heard about before. According to Derek, those guarantees were still active in a legal sense, even though the business had failed long ago. If that financial exposure ever came to light, it wouldn't just create problems. It could wipe out what my parents had built over decades. Their savings, their credit, even their property stability could all be at risk. I sat there in silence after hearing that, trying to process it. It didn't feel real at first. My parents had always acted like they were just caught in the middle of everything. Like they were neutral, confused, maybe even helpless. But now something about those moments started replaying in my mind differently. The way my mother told me to just cooperate. The way my father avoided looking at me during the arrest. The way neither of them asked questions about the evidence or tried to challenge anything happening in court. At the time, I thought it was fear or shock, but Derek's findings made it feel different now. It felt like careful silence. Not silence from ignorance, but silence from protection. Just not protection for me. For the first time, I started seeing this situation in a colder light. My parents weren't just standing by while I was being destroyed. They were standing still because moving could expose something they had spent years trying to keep buried. And Caleb's lawsuit suddenly didn't feel like an isolated attack anymore. It felt like it was connected to something much older inside the family, something that had nothing to do with me at all. But I was the one paying the price for it. Derek didn't stop searching through my home systems. He said if someone had tampered with the footage before, there could still be hidden layers or backup devices most people never notice. I didn't fully understand what he meant until he called me late one night. He told me he had found something unusual in the garage network. At first, it looked like just another connected device, but it wasn't listed in my main security setup. It had been running quietly in the background, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He traced it carefully and confirmed it was a secondary camera feed that I had never been told about. It wasn't part of the standard installation I had paid for when I bought the house. Someone had added it separately, and it had been recording without my knowledge. My heart dropped when he said he recovered footage from it. When I finally saw the clips, I couldn't speak for a moment. The video showed Caleb inside my house weeks before the lawsuit ever happened. He wasn't alone. He was talking to someone I didn't recognize, a man standing near the kitchen area, looking over papers spread across my counter. They were speaking in low voices, like they didn't want to be heard even though they were inside my own home. Caleb pointed at something on the table and said they needed to make everything look clean and legal on paper. The other man nodded and started sorting through documents, adjusting them like they were building something step by step. I felt sick watching it, but I couldn't stop. Then came the part that changed everything. The unknown man leaned closer and said a single line that stayed in my head like a warning I couldn't escape. Once she's arrested, she can't fight back. I replayed it again and again, hoping I had misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding. The plan was clear in a way I never wanted to see. This wasn't random conflict or emotional family tension anymore. It was preparation. Quiet, deliberate preparation inside my own home. And for the first time, I understood that my arrest hadn't been the start of the story. It had been the final step of something already carefully built long before I ever noticed anything was wrong. Derek came back with the full picture, and this time he didn't try to soften anything. He placed all the documents on the table in front of me and told me to look at the pattern instead of the emotions. Caleb wasn't just struggling. He was buried in debt from a failed investment deal that had collapsed months before I bought the house. On paper, it looked like a separate problem, but Derek showed how deeply it was connected to my property file. My house, according to the financial structure Caleb had been involved in, was indirectly tied to a loan guarantee system he had used through a risky business arrangement. It wasn't obvious at first, but once you followed the paper trail, everything pointed back to that connection. If my ownership stayed clean and fully verified, it would trigger a wider financial review. That review wouldn't just look at me. It would expose the guarantees tied to Caleb's failed deal. And once that happened, he would lose everything. His credit, his remaining assets, and possibly face legal consequences from multiple institutions. I sat there reading it slowly, trying to make sense of how something I worked so hard for had turned into a shield for someone else's mistakes. Derek said something that stayed with me. He said this wasn't about anger or jealousy. It wasn't even about family conflict in the way I originally thought. It was survival. Caleb wasn't trying to win against me. He was trying to stop his own collapse. And the lawsuit, the documents, even the arrest, all of it was structured to remove me from the situation fast enough so the system wouldn't dig deeper. Then Derek added something even harder to accept. My parents weren't completely unaware of what was happening. They might not have known every detail, but they understood enough to realize that if the situation escalated, their own financial history could also be pulled into the investigation. That's why their silence made sense now in a different way. It wasn't confusion or neutrality. It was self-preservation. Staying quiet meant staying out of the spotlight. I leaned back, trying to breathe normally, but everything felt heavier. The house I thought represented my independence had been placed in the middle of a financial structure I never agreed to be part of. And suddenly, the entire case didn't feel like a family argument anymore. It felt like I had been pulled into a crisis that was already in motion long before I ever signed the papers. The courtroom felt colder than I expected that day. I sat quietly as Derek prepared everything, placing the final set of evidence on the table. Caleb avoided looking at me, but I could feel his tension from where I was sitting. My parents were behind him, both looking worn down, like they hadn't slept properly in days. When the hearing started, Derek stood up and began presenting the hidden camera footage. The room changed the moment the video played. Caleb was shown inside my house weeks before the lawsuit, speaking calmly about preparing documents and controlling how everything would look on paper. The judge leaned forward as the footage continued. Then the key moment was played again, the line about making sure I couldn't fight back once I was arrested. The courtroom went silent immediately after it ended. Derek didn't stop there. He connected the footage with the financial records, the missing security logs, and the inconsistencies in the documents Caleb had submitted. Piece by piece, the story he built in court didn't look like a misunderstanding anymore. It looked planned. The judge raised his hand and ordered a full suspension of the current case. Within minutes, the fraud charges against me started falling apart. The evidence that once looked strong now looked contaminated and manipulated. Caleb's expression changed when he realized what was happening. For the first time, he didn't look confident. Security officers moved in as the judge ordered his custody for fraud-related actions and evidence tampering. Behind him, my parents broke down. My mother covered her face, and my father sat down like he had lost all strength. But I didn't feel anger in that moment. I just felt distance. When I was finally cleared to leave, I walked out of the courthouse slowly. There were no celebrations in my mind, no relief that felt complete. Just a heavy understanding that everything I went through had already taken something from me long before justice arrived. My name was cleared, but what stayed with me was how easily silence can protect the wrong side. And as I stepped outside, I knew my life was mine again, but it would never feel the same as before.